All right, I got a wet bandana on my head because it's hot here in Bend, Oregon, and I don't have an AC. So there you go. So I want to talk about Kulinsky, not because he's that important individually, but because he sort of represents a trend that I see happening in progressive circles. I think Kyle would identify as a progressive. I'm sure he has in the many videos that he posts on his YouTube channel. But I've noticed an increasing what he would call narrative humping on his behalf when it comes to the issue of Palestine and Israel, or Palestinians in Israel. Yeah, so all of his, anytime he mentions, first of all, anytime he mentions Israel, it's always bombshell breaking, and it's always going to be anti-Israel, whatever he's reporting on, whatever he's talking about. And I use the term reporting loosely because he's not an actual journalist, and I think, to be fair, I think he would actually admit that himself. But like I said, there is a lot of narrative humping going on with him when it comes to this issue, and I think to be somewhat cynical, I think his audience, we talk about audience capture when it comes to conservatives. I think the left can be just as guilty of this, and I think he's fallen victim to it myself. But why would I say that? Well, there's a story that he published on his YouTube channel on July 8th that I think is pretty damning. Bombshell: 186,000 Palestinians killed by IDF. Where does that figure come from? Well, it comes from a letter, not a study, certainly not a peer-reviewed study, a letter submitted to Lancet by 3 academics. I think it would be fair to say they're partisan. They have a certain perspective. They've got skin in the game in terms of their sympathies, and it's pretty obvious where those lie. But here's the problem. The problem is, even if you just simply read this letter, it doesn't actually say what Kyle thinks it says. I don't know if Kyle actually read the letter, or if he's just reposting some shit that he saw on X. Maybe he did read the letter and he took fucking Adderall before he read it. And, was too hyped up to pay attention to what the fuck he was reading. But I think it's actually important to read it. So about, this 196,000 figure comes about 5 or 6 paragraphs into the letter. Now, it's incredibly important to read the preceding paragraph, so I'm going to do that because it provides context on this figure. So here we go. Armed conflicts have indirect health implications beyond the direct harm from violence. Even if the conflict ends immediately, there will continue to be many indirect deaths in the coming months and years from causes such as reproductive, communicable, and non-communicable diseases. The total death toll is expected to be large given the intensity of the conflict, destroyed healthcare infrastructure, severe shortages of food, water, and shelter, populations' inability to flee to safe places, and the loss of funding to UNRWA, one of the very few humanitarian organizations still active in the Gaza Strip. Again, think about what I just read you. There will continue to be many indirect deaths in the coming months and years. Okay, next paragraph. In recent conflicts, such indirect deaths range from 3 to 15 times the number of direct deaths. Applying a conservative estimate of 4 indirect deaths per 1 direct death. Citation given. Now, when I first read this Lancet letter, the citation was incorrect. The citation given in the letter pulled up a study of drug use and drug facilities. We'll fuck am I trying to say? People that are in rehab for drug use. So it was a bit confusing. I was like, and I read through the fucking thing. It was a few hundred pages to figure out where are they getting this information from. But apparently they've fixed the link, and I read through it, and I understand where they're getting this from. So let's go ahead and just, for the sake of argument, now you may have methodological problems, can't even say that fucking word, with the figure itself and its original source. Okay, sure. But let's just go ahead and say, for the sake of argument, 4-1. Okay. All right, so again, to reread that sentence, applying a conservative estimate of 4 indirect deaths per 1 direct death to the 37,396. Again, this Lancet letter was published about a month ago. Deaths reported. It is not implausible to estimate that up to 186,000 or more deaths could be attributable to the current conflict in Gaza. Again, understand where they're getting this from. They're multiplying the number of deaths by 4 to arrive at this figure, right? Or 4-1, I should say, right? The ratio. And again, this is indirect deaths in the coming months and years. They're not saying that the IDF has killed 186,000 Gazans. That's not what they're fucking saying. But there you go. You know, you publish this number, people don't properly put it into context, they don't understand what they're reading, and so you get some stupid ass post like, you know, Kyle's. And it's just complete bullshit. Now, I posted a comment on the original video where I pointed out this is not correct. This is a lie. This is not what the article says. But, of course, he doesn't respond. Maybe he doesn't read the comments. Who knows? Now, the question is, even if someone pointed out to him that he was full of shit and this is not accurate, would he retract it? Would he correct himself? It's a good question. But, again, this is why it's very difficult to posture oneself as, you got to be careful. You don't want to, you know, once you start getting too sanctimonious and self-righteous, and I don't know, for my money, you get sloppy shit like this, right? You get, again, slanderous propaganda, which is what this is. So there's that issue, right? But also, I think it's kind of important to actually have a broader discussion about Palestine and Israel. You know, I lived in Egypt for a short time, and one of my students there referred to Israel as, quote, stolen Palestine. Stolen Palestine. It's interesting because, you know, from a child, you know, I don't know, you know, I don't expect much in the way of critical thinking. They're not going to have a good grasp of history. They probably haven't read much about the issue. They've just been propagandized, right? But as adults, we're supposed to know better than that. So is it true that Israel is still in Palestine? Well, when the modern Zionist movement began in the late 1800s, first of all, understand why, or, you know, obviously there's multiple reasons, but a big reason why the modern Zionist movement was founded was because they needed sanctuary. Jews needed sanctuary. The various pogroms in Europe and Russia. So they needed somewhere to go. And for religious reasons, cultural reasons, they decided to go back to their homeland, their historic homeland. Now, stolen Palestine, you know, at the time, and this is actually coming from Ottoman census records. At the time, there was about 60,000 Jews in Ottoman Palestine. And I say Ottoman Palestine because Palestine was not a country. It was part of the Syrian province. Do people like Kyle know that? I doubt it. What about the Arabs that were living in Palestine, in Syrian Palestine at the time, the Syrian province of Palestine? Was their land stolen from them? No, it wasn't. The land was bought from Ottoman Turk landowners that were, you know, you could call them absentee landowners. I got a bunch of notes that I made because, you know, I want to keep this shit in order, right? Yeah, so absentee Ottoman landowners, right? The Arabs there are itinerant farmers. Okay. So in what sense is the land stolen? You know, I've seen people make the claim, try to conflate this with what happened to Native Americans and the Europeans that came and colonized North America or South America and Central America, right? I don't think that's a good analogy. I don't think that makes any sense because in the case of the Native Americans, again, I'm speaking generally, you're dealing with people that had a communal perspective on ownership, right? The concept of selling and buying land, it just didn't exist. It didn't make sense, again, generally speaking. Whereas in the Syrian province of Palestine, that did exist, right? So to claim that it's stolen, that doesn't make sense. In that, talking about that, right? Now fast forward to 48, Israel declaring independence, declaring itself a country. Understand that the previous year, there was an opportunity for a two-state solution that was rejected by the Arabs. Okay? So in 48, Israel declares itself a state. They are attacked by 7 Arab states, and Israel repels that attack. Now here's a little tangent. I've noticed a trend historically that you've got Arab aggression, whether it's Palestinians or Arab states attacking Israel, or in 67, massing, for an attack, Egypt, Syria, Jordan. There were other Arab countries that had soldiers in the mix, but predominantly Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. But this trend is, you've got these Arab states and Palestinians that attack Israel. Israel responds, and the Arabs scream bloody murder. That's interesting to me. Now, a lot of people talk about, well, it's because the Israelis disproportionately respond. Well, what the fuck does that mean? consider the October 7th situation. So roughly 1,200 Israelis are killed. And, as of right now, let's go ahead and say 40,000 Palestinians have been killed. Is that what they mean by proportionality? Well, that's what they mean, but is that actually the definition of proportionality? No, it's not. That is not what proportionality means in warfare. I'll give you the definition. Incidental and involuntary harm caused to the civilian population during a military attack must not be excessive in relation to the direct military advantage gained. That's what proportionality means. It doesn't mean, well, okay, so you killed 1,000 of my people, so I'm going to kill 1,000 of yours. That's not what it fucking means. Now, I can already hear people like Kyle screaming at me, oh my God, you're sort of blasé about, this huge number of Palestinians that have been killed versus the 1,200 Israelis that were killed. Well, I'm not blasé about it. But the problem is, what's the ratio of non-combatants versus combatants in that 40,000 figure? We don't know the answer to that. We can make guesses. We can even make educated guesses. I think, according to Israel, the ratio would probably be somewhere around 60-40, 55-45, something like that. Now, again, I'm sure people like Kyle are going to say, well, Jesus fucking Christ, 15,000 or 20,000 Palestinian non-combatants are killed, and you're just going to gloss over it? No, I'm not. But the question is, who's responsible for those deaths? Yes, Israeli military actions are the proximate cause. But let's not pretend like Hamas gives a shit, or worse than that, didn't intend for those deaths to happen. People like Kyle fail to understand that the strategy of Hamas is that a large number of non-combatant inadvertent casualties are going to result from Israeli retaliation. Now you could say, well, then the Israelis just shouldn't retaliate. My answer to that is, are you fucking nuts? Really? So you're not going to retaliate if you've been attacked? The double standard. The double standard in this issue is absolutely mind-boggling. And again, I'm not saying that you don't criticize Israel and the IDF when they do something wrong. Absolutely. Criticize them. If there are atrocities committed, intentional atrocities committed by the IDF, prosecute those motherfuckers. Whoever's involved in it. And I mean that. I'm not just talking about the individual soldiers. If military officers or if civilian authorities gave orders to commit atrocities, prosecute them. I've got no love for theocracies. I've got no love for theists, period. Full stop. None. Genocide? Well, according to the Old Testament, the Jews pretty much invented that shit. Right? So, I'm not fucking choosing sides here. But what bothers me is the lack of honesty and even-handedness when talking about this issue. People like Kyle, they talk about, okay, so Arabs are 20% of the population in Israel. Now, those could be Muslims, could be Druze, could be Christians, various different groups, atheists, probably not so much. Um, but they talk about how, they don't have equality in Israel. Well, according to their Declaration of Independence, they do. Um, Now, they don't really have a constitution. They have this legal document or a set of legal documents. And you could make the argument that equality of rights is not explicitly spelled out. And okay, sure. And if you want to talk about discrimination, either structural, de facto, de jure, okay, let's have that conversation. But I think if we have that conversation, let's also talk about, well, where does the responsibility lie? What do I mean by that? Are we 100% certain that these insular groups inside of Israel just simply don't want to assimilate? We know that's the case in many Western nations, right? Now, I'm specifically talking about Muslim Arabs, not Arabs in general. Because, again, like I already articulated, the Arabs in Israel are not exclusively Muslim. I would say predominantly, but not exclusively. Jerusalem. So people like Kyle are going to talk about Jerusalem. Well, you've got, what is it, 130,000 Arabs that are not citizens, right? They're residents. Why is that? They rejected the opportunity. They were offered citizenship and they rejected it after the 67 war. Did you know that? Do motherfuckers like Kyle actually read anything about the situation? Or are they just getting all their information from Twitter? It's a genuine question because I don't know the answer to that. I have my suspicions. So, what else did I want to talk about? Yeah, when I say that people like Kyle are not being fair and even-handed about this, and there's a double standard. Not too long ago, I think, what was it, last week? 12 kids were killed playing soccer in Israel. They were killed by Hezbollah. Not one fucking story. Not a mention by Kyle. Not even a fucking mention. And this is not the result of collateral damage. They were targeted. Kids targeted, playing a fucking game of soccer, man. And this is not an anomaly. This is not an outlier. Hezbollah and Hamas, they target civilians intentionally. October 7th. So one of the reasons why October 7th was such a terrible event is because it was actually a holiday. So a lot of the soldiers were on leave. Are we going to pretend like Hamas didn't know that? Are we going to pretend like they didn't specifically choose that day because of the fact that soldiers would be on leave? Are we going to pretend like the fact that a large, not a majority, but the largest group of people that were killed that day were just civilians at a music festival? I think 360 something people. What's the military value in that? You know, we have to stop pretending like there's no difference between collateral damage and intentionally targeting non-combatants and civilians, because that's bullshit. I mean, it's not just naive, it's almost suicidally stupid. You know, Sam Harris sort of had a hypothetical, a thought experiment where he talked about, what if the Israelis adopted the same tactic as not just Hamas, but Palestinians, right? Of using their own people as human shields. It's a problem for Israelis because they actually don't want to directly target non-combatants. They don't want to kill them. That's not part of their strategy. But if the Israelis adopted the same strategy and used their own people as human shields, it would be genocide. Because Palestinians, and I'm using that word deliberately, I'm not just solely isolating Hamas and Hezbollah, but Palestinians, the vast majority of them, would fucking delight in massacring the Jews. Why do I say that? Am I racist? No, I say that because all the polling suggests that. As recently as March, the amount of Gazans that supported October 7th was still over 70%. Now that's come down. I think in June it went down to about 57, something like that. I'm not sure where it stands right now. First question would be, why has that number gone down? Well, because now there's sort of understanding and there's repercussions. And again, I talked about this earlier, this is a trend. I hate to say it, but this is a trend in the Arab world. It's Allah Akbar until Israel retaliates. And then it's, oh shit, what the fuck do we do? Come help us. And again, motherfucker, you can call me whatever the fuck you want to call me. There's nothing I've said that isn't true. Unlike Kyle. Now, does that mean that all the Palestinians are culpable? No, it doesn't. Of course not. But I think we also have to be honest, and there are reports from the survivors of October 7th that at least some of the attackers were dressed in civilian clothes. Now, that could be Hamas members dressed in civilian clothes, but it begs the question, since an awful lot of them were not. They were clearly identified as Hamas fighters or whatever militant faction they were associated with. So, interesting question. There was, I believe his name was Abdallah al-Jamal, who has been accused, he was killed by the IDF, and he was accused, along with his father, of housing at least one of the hostages that were rescued not too long ago. I believe 3 hostages. I mean, it's a little bit scattered, the information, and it would be great if self-righteous journalists like Kyle would actually report this and investigate it a little bit so that we could clarify the issue. But they don't want to, because that could potentially undermine their propaganda. Right? Al Jazeera. There was a recent article because there was, I do not remember, Ismail Al Ghul. Yeah, Ismail Al Ghul. So there was a strike on him because he was accused of being a member of Hamas. So it's not just that he was, or they're not alleging that he was a civilian that participated, but they're alleging direct ties with Hamas, the IDF. And he's allegedly a reporter for Al Jazeera, or there's some connection. So now Al Jazeera, to be fair, they're disputing this. I'm not quite sure what they're disputing, whether he was connected with them or whether he was connected with Hamas. I don't know. But again, it would be great if people like Kyle would even fucking mention this shit. But again, they're not going to, because it contradicts their narrative. And again, he is a fucking narrative humper on this issue. You know. The Arab states. So there's 22 Arab states. None of them want anything to do with the Palestinians. None of them. Israel borders Gaza. They do not want them. Why? Why is that? Well, again, I go back to that 71% of Gazans in March that agreed with the October 7th attack. All these Arab states, all the leaders of these Arab states view the Palestinians as destabilizing zealots. That's why they want nothing to do with them. They'll talk about supporting the Palestinian cause, but when it comes to actually helping them, when it comes to providing sanctuary, relocating them, they want nothing to fucking do with them. Now, someone like Kyle would say, well, why the fuck should they be relocated? They're Palestinians. Okay. What about a little under 1 million Jews that have been expelled from Arab countries? Someone like Kyle's never going to talk about that. What about them? Why isn't their cause an issue? Well, because they're not irrationally trying to claim a right to return, right? Those that were expelled relocated to Israel. So there's one Jewish state that's providing sanctuary for Jews. There's 22 Arab states that could provide sanctuary for Palestinians. I don't understand. I don't understand. I mean, please, enlighten me. Enlighten me on this topic. The Jews need a homeland. Are we going to pretend like the entirety of history is irrelevant to that issue? It's pretty obvious they need a homeland. it's pretty obvious they need their own state. Now, again, I'm firmly against theocracies, or ethno-states for that matter. But if you are going to eliminate the Jewish ethno-state, why don't you also do the same for Islamic theocracies and or Arab majority states? Why not? Why isn't there a similar call for that? I see a lot of incongruity between the two. I see a lot of double standards being applied. And to be charitable, I don't necessarily think it's explicitly anti-Semitic. But then again, does it really matter if it's achieving the same purpose? I don't think it does. I really don't. I think that people like Kyle need to just fucking get rid of their sanctimonious, self-righteous bullshit and be honest about the issue. The issue is complicated. It's more complicated than I've articulated. I'm sure there's many facets that I need to be educated about it, right? But just posturing the Palestinians as this perpetual victim of Israeli aggression without any context. I mean, you don't even need to dig that deep into history to see that that's just sort of that's a bullshit dichotomy. Again, where Israel is wrong, absolutely criticize them. I haven't even brought up the West Bank, and I think fair-minded observers would say, yeah, the claims of apartheid state doesn't make sense in Israel, doesn't really make sense in Gaza, but in the West Bank, probably got an argument there. That's a fair-minded analysis. But genocide in Gaza? Come on, man. Get the fuck out of here. Just be honest. Just be honest.